Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Yosefa Fogel-Rubel, and this is One-on-One, Women Talk Torah, a series brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. The coming episodes of the Matan podcast, One-on-One, will be delving into women writing. In these conversations, we explore where their relationship with learning meets their identity as writers, how their creative identity intersects with their identity as women. We will hear about their passions and what they aspire to achieve through writing. But I also seek to understand what moves them. How has writing changed them and their careers? Is being a religious female writer an identity that resonates with them and influences their process and decisions? Or perhaps not at all? Each episode takes us into a different space, each woman with a unique story and a unique area of expertise. I hope, above all, that these episodes inspire, move, and that they may even inspire you to sit down and write and to create something that really requires intention, to put aside that time and actually accomplish it. I'm so grateful that you've joined us for these episodes in which I explore the creative process with these eloquent, humble, and remarkable women. Simi Peters has been teaching in the Belos Eshkolot Educators Institute for Tanakh and Jewish Studies for the past 3 years at Matan and is a senior faculty member at Nishmat. She is the author of Learning to Read Midrash and specializes in skill building, providing access to a wide variety of classic Jewish texts for students at all levels of Jewish literacy and experience. Simi, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I have to say that you don't know this, but I feel a little bit like you were also one of my teachers, because when I was much younger, how many years ago did the book come out, your first book?
2004, I think.
2004. Mm-hmm. So let me date myself. It was a long time ago. I was, I guess, not even 20. Mm-hmm. And I bought the book. I own it. It's in my bag upstairs. And I learned a lot from it. And I learned a lot from its rigor and from its language and utilizing all different skills that we'll talk about today. And so I want to say thank you, first of all, to have the chance to meet you and let you know that you teach a lot of people, and that's the power of a book, that it reaches people even though you never know that it reaches them.
It's very gratifying to hear that, because when you send a book out, you just don't know where it's going to end up.
Totally.
It just goes out there, and it's like sort of giving birth,
Totally. I think that is the metaphor. That is the metaphor for book writing.
When the publisher brought
Very
the
painful.
book, the publisher brought the book to the house. He said, "Well, here's the baby," and my youngest son was there, and he was like, "Excuse me," he didn't like that, but that's how it felt in a lot of ways. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to circle back to that book as we continue forward. No matter what the topic of our series are, and this is a series that we're doing on women writing and women creating in all different forms. But before we get to talk about that process, I really love to hear about how you got to this world of higher Torah education and of learning. And especially when I speak with women who are of a generation or two above me, everybody's journeys are so diverse because nothing was as clear or simple at that point. And so I would love to hear how you got into this world.
Okay. My parents were Holocaust survivors, and it was a home of Torah. It was a home in which Torah was very important. When I was growing up, the whole Haredi Olam HaTorah in America was very, very young. And my brother, who's 8 years older than me, went to yeshiva, was sent away by my parents to yeshiva at a time when people just didn't do that.
Oh, wow.
He was very eager to do that. That was something that he very, very much wanted to do. I was jealous. My father was a completely natural feminist. He learned with his daughters as well as with his son. He was a person who learned, was kovei itim l'Torah at a time when people didn't do that.
Mamash, yeah.
And I went to a school where the level of the education was very, very high. Subsequently, I went to Beis Yaakov. It was part of the Beis Yaakov Reshet. It was called Torah Academy for Girls in Far Rockaway. Okay. Rabbi Whiteman was, I think, a pioneer in giving quality Torah education to women.
Still exists.
Yes. I have to say, and through no fault of the school necessarily, it's been many years, some of my nieces went to that school. At the time, I had excellent teachers, and they really turned me on, and I was thirsty. I remember my mother was a little bummed about this. She, we would go shopping, and I would buy Svarim, and she wanted me to buy clothes, But no, she was proud of me, but it was a little bit of a leap for her, coming from Europe. So I just got turned on in high school, and I was eager and hungry, and just kept learning. Mm-hmm. The way I got into Midrash was I started teaching. I didn't do any formal teacher's education or anything like that. I started teaching when I was 19 in the day school system while I was in college, and I continued for a few years in the day school system before I made Aliyah after graduate school. And it always bothered me that I could explain how Rashi and the Ramban worked, but I couldn't explain, and I used a lot of Midrash in my teaching, because in a Beis Yaakov system, you do a lot of Midrash. And Rashi brings Midrash, obviously. Mm-hmm. Most of the Parshanim allude to Midrash. I was using Midrash in my teaching because I would go back to the original source and use it in actually teaching. I did a lot of teaching of Nach, and there are a lot of things in Nach you really can't teach without Midrash. And I could sort of wing it, but I wasn't comfortable with the degree to which I didn't have that rigor. Mm-hmm. And this is how the Midrash is working, and this is how I'm deriving my reading. So after I'd been in Israel, I guess it was in 2004. So I'd been in it. My oldest was 4. I got accepted in 2002, maybe. I don't remember. The Jerusalem Fellows Program. And I spent 2 years getting the background and the rigor that I wanted.
What does that mean? Meaning, was that an academic?
It was an academic. Today it's called the Mandel Leadership thingy. Yeah. I don't know what they call it now. Mm-hmm. And it's taken on a much more political focus. But at the time, they liked me because I was the token Haredi woman.
Exactly. Yeah. You filled a nice little.
I checked off a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
And what I had the most amazing manche in the program, who's Dr. Zalkin, Dr. Avram Zalkin, Zatzal. I say that without any cynicism. Mm-hmm. He was a Yakir Yerushalayim, a gentle, wise man with a lot of knowledge and a mechanech to his bone, Mm-hmm. And he guided me in my study. I was able, as a member of the fellowship, to take courses at Hebrew U. So I got to learn with Yonah Frankel, who was a giant. I think
and Midrash, for those who don't know.
Midrash and Agadah. He's the person who got the Israeli academic establishment to sit up and pay serious attention to Agadot Chazal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was like learning from, the founder of a field, really.
Yeah.
I took other courses as well. And I read a lot, and I learned a lot, and I, developed my approach to Midrash.
And all throughout these years, you're teaching in institutions in Yerushalayim.
I'm teaching in all sorts of 18-year-old programs,
I have to say that my personal memory is I went to Shalvim for Women in the first year it existed, and then it was in the old Holy Land Hotel, and you taught in Darchei Bina, right?
Yes, I taught in Darchei Bina.
And you taught a friend of mine who, was in the slightly more, what do they call it, yeshivish or track, and so she was there, and I remember that you were the teacher who was the textual, right? I'm sure there were others, but I remember your name as being the rigorous, right? That was a class that was going to have rigor, and you had to come ready.
Yeah. And, I'm a demanding teacher. I think it's the highest compliment you can pay to your students is to trust them to be capable of meeting your standards and giving them the highest possible level of intellectual and spiritual challenge in Talmud Torah. So.
And with that in mind, meaning you've really taught at institutions that sort of cover a bit of a cross-section of the Orthodox world, which you've already, I guess, given us a little bit of insight into that growing up in what you called even back then a Haredi-ish home.
Yeah. People didn't talk about Haredi.
No, I'm saying it's a little bit
of an anachronistic
word.
It's an anachronistic word. It was like we were the frummies in Far Rockaway. People like us were the black hatters, we got called. I could do a whole podcast on my parents. That generation.
We'll invite you back.
No, that generation of survivors who brought passion and fire and determination all over wherever they went. Those who remained religious and committed to halakha and committed to reconstructing the Judaism that they had come from as far as they could, which you can't in a new place like America, especially. That was like the fire and the air and the water and the bread and the everything of my life and of a whole generation of mostly young men, but also some young women.
And when you find yourself today teaching into wonderful institutions that further women's learning in a very it's a non-Haredi Welt. So where does that meet you? Meaning, is that a place that you feel comfortable in because you've always been this woman who learns and that's a natural place for women who learn? Or is there some sort of, what kind of awareness do you bring into that space?
I think that for me, where I teach doesn't matter as much as that I'm teaching Jewish women. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not a political person. I'm not into politics. I'm not always comfortable with the kav taken by the institutions I teach in, whether it is a Haredi institution or a Dati Leumi institution or a modern Orthodox institution. But I don't have to be. As long as nobody restricts my teaching and I'm able to do what I do and not compromise my own intellectual integrity or my own religious lines, then I'm okay with that. I've taught all kinds of people. And sometimes I look back and I think, I should put that on my resume. I once taught a theater troupe of Jews and non-Jews who were involved in an educational program I was consulting for, so that they would understand what the process of Talmud Torah is like on the subject of Pirkei Avot, which is something you can teach to people who have no background. I remember one of the actors said, "Who is Rabbi Akiva and why should I listen to him?" So I've taught lots of people in lots of settings, and as long as I'm not compromising my own standards and values, whether religiously or intellectually, I'm good with that. It's very interesting. I live almost next door to Neve Yerushalayim, and people always ask me, why don't you teach in their programs? And I said, well, if you teach in certain programs, they're not going to invite you to teach there, which I get. I totally get. I don't have a problem with that. But recently, I started giving a few guest shiurim at Midrash Tehillah, which is on the Neve campus. It's part of the Neve network. So it's interesting, the
dynamic. But you're saying that there's an awareness that comes in there, but in terms of your personal red lines, it's just as long as I have the freedom to do what I would like in my own classroom, and I'm teaching Jewish women and bringing that to their lives. And that's
I also, under certain circumstances, Jewish men. When I teach in Chutz La'aretz, in communities where there's a dearth of opportunity for quality Talmud Torah, I'll teach men too. I don't think it's a kavod hatzibur issue. I've spoken to a Rav about this, because in those communities, there is no issue of kavod hatzibur in that setting.
If you could pick two values that stand in the front of your mind, and you're teaching young women Torah, that you would want them to take with them out of the classroom, what are those?
So the first is that it's not enough to learn Torah, to be told Torah. What really transforms us is the process of learning Torah. I could make a list of important values in Judaism and read it off a page, and there would be some value in that. Okay? But what transforms us, what makes us religiously developed personalities is the process of Talmud Torah. So I remember once giving a shiur on a hard nitziv that I had my students look at. And they were really very unhappy because I made them prepare it before class, and they were struggling with it. And after I had taught the nitziv, I came in and I taught the nitziv. I said to them, okay, what would have happened if I had summarized the nitziv for you? And every single one of them agreed. It would not have meant the same. They would not have understood it at the same level. It would not have been the same thing. So the process of Talmud Torah is almost as important as the bottom line message, because the message has to emerge from the text. The texts are sacred, and they're written this way for a reason, to engage, to pull us in, to make us understand.
Like the yigia, you need to be miyagea.
To be miyagea. The second thing that I think is very, very important to me is that if I am worried that what I will teach will have a negative effect on someone's yirat shamayim, and that is going to depend on who the student is, obviously, their level of knowledge, where they're coming from, what they need, I won't teach it. And I don't know if I've always been right where I've drawn the lines, but if you do Talmud Torah without yirat shamayim, Elisha ben Avuya, what's the point? Yeah. What are we trying to accomplish here? We cannot divorce Talmud Torah from Yirat Shamayim, Ahavat Hashem, the core religious values. So those would be my two points.
Yeah. Okay, I want us to transition into some of your writing. Okay, as this particular series we're doing is to really showcase the different kind of writing that women are engaged with. Mm-hmm. So I want to hear how you got to that point where you said, now it's time to write a book, right? What was that process like?
Well, basically I've been teaching Midrash for a long time. And I was getting tired of hearing people say things like it's just a Midrash, or hearing people's mouth off. People think they can say whatever they want about Midrash. Basically because there's no derech halimud that is out there in either the yeshivish world or in the non-yeshivish world. And a lot of people have very fundamental misunderstandings of how Chazal work. And I got tired of saying it's not just stories. Okay. It was driving me crazy. I also sort of felt like I had reached a critical mass and a critical bar in my teaching where it wouldn't be so hard to write a book. I also think that what was important to me was to reach more than the people in my classroom. And today maybe that would be having a website where you teach on the website, but for me that was writing a book, to send it out there and see.
It still is, by the way. The book still has a different echo than a website does.
I am relieved to hear you say that. I am relieved to hear you say that. So, and I know that there are, for example, teachers who would not have had access to this kind of material, or would not have known where to look for this kind of material, who found the book and found it helpful. It actually is used in some college courses, which I found interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. I guess it helps to have a non-Jewish surname. I mean, maybe, there's a Christian college that uses it, which is a little disconcerting, but it's not the only one. I actually got a letter from a professor at Concordia University who said he really likes the book and he uses it a lot in his course. And yeah, so it's nice. It's nice. And you never know who you're going to reach. I got a letter from Japan. Somebody asked me a question about the book. It was like, what? Really?
Amazing.
But, yeah. So you don't know.
Can I just ask, you don't have to tell me your age, but what stage of life were you at when you published that book?
Okay, so I'm 63, and I don't think it's a sin to be 63.
I certainly don't, but people have all different kinds of sensitivities. I think it's beautiful.
My grandchildren know I'm 63, not that it means anything to them, but one of them said to me, Papi, at mamash skena. Look, what did she say to me? Lifnei Kom Hamdina.
Were you born before this day was established? So you published this book when you were done having children. I just want, I'll tell you why I'm asking that. Because women, God bless us, we have chapters in our lives, and depending on who we are, we could be more or less frustrated. Sometimes we need to hear that things come in chapters, and even though you can't do it this decade, you could do it next decade. And sometimes women need to hear all different kinds of sentences, and it's just a matter of when it comes to you at the right point. So I'm just curious if that, because many women will describe that after they finished having their children, or the youngest child was a little bit older, that there's a little bit of that brain space, that hormonal, hopefully calming down, that it just sort of like you're able to open up more space within you to birth, as we said, another creation. So I'm just curious if that happened while you were, having children, or it was really after.
So I got married later, to as I said, my mother's great dismay. But I was 27 when I got married. Actually, it was 2 weeks short of my 28th birthday. And I have 3 children. And the youngest was, I think, 5 when the book came out, something like that. And I had some guilt around that. I did have some guilt because it was a lot of hours in the library. I made an arrangement with a friend of mine that I was tutoring her daughter in English, and she would watch my son in the afternoons, like twice a week or something like that. I think he resented it a little bit.
We could bring him on to the next series about children who've been scarred by their mothers for writing.
Right. Well, he's gotten over it. He's okay. Well, no, he hasn't completely gotten over it.
Okay, so he was still young.
He was still youngish. I figured it out. I think there is a conflict here. On the other hand, if I had waited to really, I did the fellowship when my oldest was 4, and that was a lot of hours and it was a lot of work. If I had waited till the kids were grown up, I don't know if I would have done the things I needed to do to get to where I am today. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an Indian chief. I mean, I'm a teacher, which to a large extent was helpful in terms of hours. You do have teachers' hours are different.
Really? Because I feel like my hours are all night long.
No, well, during Corona with Zoom.
No, I mean, you're preparing all the time.
Yeah,
my
your
children,
preparation.
I imagine they'll hate teaching because they'll be like, oh, teaching means Ema works all the time.
Right.
But no, I just want to say also, I'm not advocating anything. I'm simply asking. I really, as like a little anecdotal survey, I'm curious as to when women find themselves that they're more able to go into that creative space. That's all. For some women, it might be that they had children later and they started beforehand, and so you're already in some sort of rhythm. There's no expectation behind my question.
To do the things you really want to do sometimes takes its toll. I look at someone like Ruchi Fryer, the judge in Borough Park, and I say, when does this woman sleep? Does she sleep? It's you have siyata dishmaya. I have an extremely supportive husband. He always backed me up. Also, I think about the difference between my sister's generation and mine. The men are expected to help. In your generation,
I don't even use the word help anymore.
Right. No, absolutely.
That's the generational.
But in my sister's world, it was very, very different.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So there are all sorts of
to have different families. And my father has a family of the same sort. He was the only one born in America, and his 6 siblings were born in Europe. So.
Right.
It's a fascinating thing.
It's very, a lot of circumstances affect this. But what I do tell younger scholars who ask me, and they say, well, I'll do the doctorate after the kids are older. I say to them, consider that you may not want to do the doctorate. You may be out of the schwung when the kids are older. Mm-hmm. Consider the possibility that you should do it anyway.
Yeah. I actually found doing it when my kids were very little, and I had some in the middle. I found that it was also a good balance for me where I was holding in life. Like, it was good to have the haven during the day of the intellectual. It was also a life where my children were actually in frameworks until 3:45, which is no longer existing now that they're school aged.
Right.
And it created a good balance for me to have all that intense young physical years balanced by that. And it's also, it's a huge project that it's more daunting, I think, for women when they push it off.
can I just say something? This is really not politically correct, okay? But I'm going to say it anyway, and you can always take it out if you want to. What I always tell my students is this. If you see a woman who has it all, she's got the career, she's got the beautifully kept home, the kids are this, she's got a great figure, she always looks put together, the whole, there's one of three things going on, okay? Either she has a lot of money, or she has a lot of help, or she's on drugs. It can't be done.
I hear.
I'm really can't be done. So women
wary of over-idealizing.
Right, so women have to prioritize. And the other thing, also politically incorrect, if you're lucky enough to have a problem that can be solved by throwing money at it, throw money at it. Don't clean your own house. That's a great piece of advice, yeah. Don't clean your own house. If you want to write the next doctorate on the Ben Ish Chai, so get someone else to clean your house.
Yeah.
And again, money is a problem too, but.
No, it's a very important point. And also in Israel in particular, where help is a lot less, household help is a lot less
available.
Normative.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not even less available anymore. It's a lot less normative. It's not, when you come from a world where having someone help here and there around the house is very common. It's more common today, but it's still a much bigger emotional leap, I think, to actually reach out and get that help.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to just bring us back to the book publishing. After that comes out, do you feel that it had a marked change on your career from that point on?
Oh yeah. Tell us how. First of all, because people took me more seriously. I'd written a book. It's sort of like, maybe if I were a younger scholar today, I wouldn't have written the book. I would have done a doctorate.
Yeah,
and that would have been the calling card.
Worthy point. Yeah.
The other thing is, people began to be. I'm sure lots of people were interested in Midrash before, but people began to notice me as a person who could make Midrash accessible, and I got more invitations to speak. I got more jobs. It definitely had an effect on my career. So
and when I look at that book, and we're going to speak soon about your new book. But when I look back on it now, and with the different lenses that I like to look at things in, it uses academic rigor. You do not quote academic works, correct me if I'm wrong, in the footnotes.
I mentioned, no, because my work doesn't come from there.
So that's what I want to ask you about. I want to talk about the question of influence. We mentioned before the official recording went on, is that I for many years sat behind Simi, who we didn't know each other, in the library, in the National Library. And so I know that certainly at this point in your life, you are exposed and utilize and learn from the Academy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole world of the Academy that deals with rabbinic literature. So I'm curious, how did you negotiate that kind of influence? Has that shifted also over time?
Okay, so I do mention in the book that I was influenced by the approach of Professor Yonah Frankel. And I had to make a decision. Let me back up. None of my readings in the book come from academic sources. All of the readings are mine, or where I mention it based on the Parshanim on the Midrash. And there isn't a lot of Parshanot on Midrash.
Right.
So none of the readings had to be attributed to anybody else because it was my own work. I hesitated because I did not want to assume an academic mantle I don't actually wear. I don't have a doctorate. People have given me doctorates, by the way. It's interesting. Like I was going to England to give a series of talks, and they sent me the publicity stuff to check, and they wrote Dr. Simi Peters, and I had to tell them I don't have a doctorate.
Oh, you're saying people awarded it to you in the title they gave you?
Yeah. Okay. They gave me doctorates. Yeah. They called me rabbanit. They gave, and I'm very old-fashioned. I don't have smicha. My husband doesn't have smicha. I'm not a rabbanit, and the whole mantle of the rabbanit is also not one I'm comfortable assuming. So I did not want to create the impression that I have an academic qualification that I don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At Povisham, I'm in the book, in footnotes, I mentioned Professor Yonah Frankel. It's interesting, in the article that I wrote for Tradition, which you read,
Yeah.
which I sent you.
Forthcoming article.
I think it came out in the spring
okay.
in tradition. I think it came out already. So Jeff Sachs was an amazing editor. Yeah. Oh no, he's an amazing editor. It's a pleasure to be edited by him. And he's got such a wealth of he's got such a depth of educational understanding.
Yes.
I really like Jeff Sachs. Okay. Yeah. But that's a separate thing. In any event, he said to me, you've got to include some academic footnotes here. And I said, well, but I didn't use any academic footnotes. And he said, yes, but people are going to know that there's literature out there on this topic. And if you don't cite it, it's going to look funny. So I did. But, and I've read a lot of academic material on Midrash, things about, or let me put it this way. The Academy is good at talking about Midrash. Mm-hmm. They're not so good at reading it line by line, readings on the page where they show you, they make claims and they don't necessarily show you how those claims are backed up in texts. And I have definitely benefited from reading academic works. There's a lot I read that I don't like. Yeah. There is something to be gained from the things I do like. Some of my reading is influenced by anthropology, sociology, and psychology, but I don't cite that either. So, and I don't cite Parshanei Midrash because I barely use them. They're not they're more like annotations than anything else. And where I take an insight from a Parshan, I do cite it. So it's complicated. I didn't want to jargon it up. And I also didn't want to make broad sweeping claims about Midrash a la academic style. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make it accessible, and I didn't want to pretend to a qualification I don't have. So I think that's it. The intellectual rigor I got in school, in high school, strangely enough. Because Torah was being taught there with more rigor than it is now taught in most Jewish day schools, Beis Yaakovs or whatever. So maybe that's also something that kept me deeply connected to the original understanding of Midrash I learned as a kid, which was that Midrash is Parshanut Chazal on Tanakh, which is not my final sort of bottom line definition of Midrash, but reading the best of academia, there were things I saw that I had already been exposed to, though they were not formulated in that way. Mm-hmm. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, no, it is clear. You know what? I want to hear the example that you've brought for us today, and then
sure.
I want to ask you something else about what that is in Midrash that pulls at you so deeply.
Okay, so I'm going to paraphrase this because there isn't really time to do it justice. If I read and translate this, it's just not going to work. But the last three psukim of the Torah say something very straightforward, which has tremendous theological significance. It's Dvarim Lamed Daled, starting from Pasuk Yud, V'lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe asher yida'o Hashem panim el panim, l'chol ha'otot v'hamoftim asher שלחו השם לעשות בארץ מצרים לפרעה ולכל עבדיו ולכל ארצו ולכל היד החזקה ולכל המורא הגדול אשר עשה משה לעיני כל ישראל. And there did not arise another prophet in Israel like Moshe, whom God knew face to face, who did all of these miracles in front of the people of Israel. That's the, essence of the pasuk. The Sifrei says something really strange here. The Sifrei says, V'lukam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe. There did not arise in Israel a prophet like Moshe, but among the nations there did arise a prophet like Moshe, which is Bilam. And the Midrash appears to describe Bilam. It's in the Sifrei. It's at the very end of the Sifrei. If you want to look it up, it's an interesting formulation. The version of the Sifrei that I use is in the Ramban on Parshat Balak. Okay. But the Sifrei says, but there did arise another prophet, like implying greater than Moshe among the nations. Now, given the theological significance of these psukim, which is, we are sealing the Torah with the statement that there is no Navi who can supersede Moshe, which means you have to keep the Torah. It's an extremely strange statement. And the two questions I had when I first learned that Midrash were, first of all, why are you saying this? What's this about?
Why undermine Moshe?
Why undermine Moshe?
Why put that out there in the world?
Why put that out there in the world? And on what basis are you saying this? So when you start to think about this question, one of the things that you notice is that there are many, many parallels between Moshe and Bilam, right? They're both prophets. They're both highly accomplished poets. Bilam's poetry, his nivuot that he delivers, are some of the most lyrical psukim in Torah.
My daughter is learning them right now, and we're saying them out loud, memorizing them in my house. So.
They're beautiful. They're beautiful. Both of them defy God, right? Moshe originally doesn't want to go to Mitzrayim. Bilam defies God in the opposite way. God doesn't want him to go to curse the Jews, but he defies God. They both, there were other parallels. There's a lot of association of the word to see in both stories. There are many literary parallels. Probably the strongest is the description of Moshe going to Eretz Mitzrayim to finally, reluctantly, fulfill the mission that Hashem wants him to fulfill after he encounters God at the Sneh and at the burning bush. And on the way, you get this strange, enigmatic story. Moshe is on his way. He stops at an inn, and Hashem wants to kill him. And he's saved by his wife, Tzipporah. Okay? Now, if you look at those two stories, the second one being Bilam on his way to curse the Jews in Arvot Moab, there are many, many parallels, even in the language. Both of them are accompanied by two Na'arim, right? Moshe, his two sons, two lads. Moshe has two sons. Bilam, his two servants. We don't need to know that Bilam is accompanied by his servants. We would assume that anyway. Moshe is described as riding a chamor, a donkey. Bilam is described as riding an aton, she-ass, female donkey. Moshe is carrying a stick. Bilam is carrying a stick. Moshe is saved by his wife. Bilam is saved by the female donkey. Mm-hmm. There are many parallels there. Okay. And I believe that Chazal are picking up in the biblical text. And again, this is not a full line-by-line analysis of the Midrash, which would be more fun to do, but what can we do? Moshe,
you'll have to read the article.
You'll have to read the article. Moshe and Bilam are being portrayed as parallel figures. The Torah is drawing an allusion between the Moshe on the way to Mitzrayim story and the Bilam on the way to Arvot Moab to curse the Jewish people story. Okay. So you have to ask yourself, what are we being told here? Okay. Now, what you pick up here, and this is the top, Bezrat Hashem, the subject of my next book, is when Chazal draw parallels between biblical figures or biblical stories where we wouldn't draw those parallels, we wouldn't think to draw those parallels, what are they asking us to do? I believe this is a good example of them asking us to compare and contrast the stories, to play the stories off each other so that you will understand each story individually better. Okay? Shockingly, we come to the conclusion, shockingly and enlighteningly, we come to the conclusion that Moshe and Bilam are very much alike. There's a lot of preoccupation with the mouth, with speech in both stories. Moshe says, I can't speak. Hashem says, don't worry, I'll put my words in your mouth. Bilam says, I want to go there. Hashem says, you're not going to be able to say anything except what I put in your mouth. There's so many parallels between these two men, right? Chazal are saying, I read this story, I look at this personality, and I have to see that God is telling me something about the connection between these two people, right? And I think the answer here, and again, if we had more time, I would do a better job. But I think what we're seeing is that Moshe could have been Bilam and Bilam could have been Moshe, right? These are two people with similar talents, inclinations, experiences in certain ways. And yet Bilam is the Rasha. He's the evil person who makes his living cursing people. That's the kind of person he is. And Moshe is Moshe Rabbeinu. He's our teacher. He has given the world the Torah. What's the difference between these two people? It's almost like the Seir LaAzazel, right? The two
Seir LaHashem and Seir LaAzazel.
Yeah, Seir LaHashem, Seir LaAzazel. They're almost the same person, but they're really, really not. And I think the answer is that Bilam, who is, when the Midrash says, among the nations no one arose, among Israel no one like Moshe arose. Among the nations there was someone who arose like Moshe. And yet, we obey Torah Moshe. Nobody's interested in what Bilam has to teach us about the world or anything else. So it's an example of a place, and there are many such midrashim. It's almost a genre of its own.
And this is the topic of the next book?
This is the topic of the next book.
This genre of midrash.
Yes. So, for example, why do Chazal point out that both Rivka and Tamar wear veils and give birth to twins? Okay, there's two minor details. What's going on over here? Mm-hmm. Why do they connect the raven in the Noach story to the raven in the Eliyahu story? Because the birds are mentioned there. What's that about? Mm-hmm. And I think it's a process of comparison and contrast that Chazal use all over the place in Midrash. They use it in the parable form. They use it in other ways. They use it in halakha too. They compare and contrast cases. Mm-hmm. Comparison and contrast are interpretive tools that Chazal use. And if we understand that that's what they're doing, we understand these texts so much better.
I guess I want to ask you, what is it about Midrash that pulls you in? Before you answer, I love stories, okay? Meaning I'm a real words person. It's one of the reasons I wanted to pick this topic for our next series. And I write about literary approaches to Tanakh because it comes from a very deep place. I love story, I love literature, I love the symmetry, I love the intentional and the non-intentional that goes into writing. What is it? Can you pinpoint something specific in Midrash? What is it about it, as opposed to, let's say, even Tanakh itself? Meaning, which they're two different. Officially, in the academy, they're two different areas. Mm-hmm. What is it about it that really draws you in?
So it's interesting. I started out as a Nach teacher because Nach is more literary than Torah. It has more of the human literary element in it. And I am also a person who is very drawn to literature, language. Beautifully written and beautifully spoken language really, really speak to me. And Midrash is beautiful. It's aesthetically extremely pleasing. But I think what really drew me to Midrash, and I'm not sure if I made up this phrase or if I read it somewhere, and that's why I'm putting it out there as I'm not sure this is my own thought. I see Chazal as the vast unconscious of the Jewish people. Mm. And Midrash, everything we as Jews who are faithful to Torah, mitzvot, Yirat Shamayim, everything we do is drawn somewhere from something in Chazal, even if the connection seems distant. Midrash is even more than Midrash Halakha, obviously, or other ways that Chazal, other styles in which Chazal teach. Midrash is almost like learning Midrash is getting in touch with the unconscious. It's so deep. It's so profound. It is our collective consciousness. And a lot of people don't really get it, don't really learn it, don't study it with rigor, and they miss a lot. But everybody connects. It's powerful. It's very, very powerful. It's full of emotion, and it is still tied to a highly sophisticated way of thinking about the world. That's a rare combination of things. A sophisticated philosophical system that is full of piety, emotion, and love and beauty.
You know, when you describe Midrash in that way, it's funny because for many of those same reasons, I'm drawn to learning the text of Tanakh.
Obviously.
And so, meaning the Midrash is Chazal's expansion.
Yes.
On that. But those are almost the same sentences that I would offer for the text. I'm sharing in that love with you, meaning that you feel like you're swimming in the DNA of everything that ever was.
Right.
And it's a very...
I think Chazal saw themselves as the Mamshi. I think even Yonah Frankel says this. I may have heard him say it. I don't think I read some of these. I think he said something like, Chazal ra'u be'atzmam mamshichei derech haTanach. Chazal saw themselves as the spiritual inheritors is a better word for that. Of the Tanakh, the people who were following the path of the Tanakh.
Okay. Just tell us, before we're going to have to close this conversation, unfortunately, but your new book is coming out this year? When should we look out for it?
Actually, my book is coming out, my first book is coming out in translation, Be'ezrat Hashem first.
Amazing.
And my new book is, I would say, 3/4 written.
Okay. So
we still have to finish it, and it will be coming out afterwards, Be'ezrat Hashem.
Okay. We'll look out for it.
Right.
I think I always like to close these conversations with a little lightning round of questions.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
I'll be a big girl and I'll deal with this.
Okay, great.
My son, when I showed him the document, he said to me, "זה מה שהיא שואלת אותך?"
Okay.
What kind of questions are these? He's Israeli. He's very Israeli.
They're a little window into the world of Simi Peters. Okay, so it's just association. Okay, you don't no long answers required. What books are on your nightstand or book? Usually there are multiples.
Yeah, there are a few. Right now, during Corona, I started reading more fiction, and I usually reread 19th century fiction because a lot of 20th century fiction is just not great. I read a lot of nonfiction, but right now I have a book on my blue plastic Keter nightstand. It's actually a children's chair, but it works very well.
Okay.
Which is Hilary Mantel's The Mirror and the Light. She wrote a trilogy about Thomas Cromwell. And the first two were amazing. Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies. This one is not amazing, but it's very good.
Wow.
And I'm enjoying that very much.
Okay. I'm going to check that out. If you could sit down with anyone, someone who's alive, dead, famous, mundane, for a drink of coffee or tea, whatever drink works for you. People had very different opinions about
good strong English tea, yeah.
For a good strong English tea, who would it be?
So I'm very lucky in that most of the people I want to talk to, I have been able to talk to for a cup of coffee or tea, or still can, Baruch Hashem. And some of the people I would do anything to speak to would not be sitting with me over a cup of tea like Rashi or the Ramban. So that's not, But I thought of two people, actually. I thought of, one is Atul Gawanda. He's who he is, right?
Yeah.
He writes beautifully. Yeah. I'd love to speak to him about writing. His writing is koleach. It just flows. It's really, really good. He's a very busy man. He's a doctor and he writes about medicine. I love the way he writes. I'd love to be able to speak to him about writing. He's also the son of immigrants, which, again, I see much taller than me. I've seen pictures of him. He's a giant. But I'd love to talk to him. And the other person I could think of who I could actually probably share a cup of tea with would be George Eliot, who is one of my heroes, So she's an incredible writer.
Your favorite tefillah?
It's a hard one to answer because That is perhaps the most personal question you've asked me. I would say the tefillah that I most connect with is Ahavat Olam Habtanu, which in Nusach Ashkenaz is Ahava Rabbah. But some tefillot we need at different times.
Yeah, it's a dynamic question.
It's
not a question that has one answer.
Right.
I definitely understand that. Something unexpected, that others wouldn't expect that you feel passionate about.
Well, my daughter says whatever I'm doing at any given time is my favorite thing. What do I feel passionate about? I feel passionate about most of what I do, I have to say. I have a weird affinity for gospel music. People don't expect that.
Okay. I also like it.
not the overtly, Avodah Zarah aspects like, the Jesus songs and stuff like that, but there's something about gospel music that just
it's soulful.
Touches me.
It's
soulful.
Oh,
right.
It's soulful, baby. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
An exotic location that you would like to visit?
An exotic location that I would like to visit, if I'm honest, I'm not a big traveler, but I would love to see Scotland.
Another thing we have in common.
Oh, look at that. I'd love to see Scotland. That does sort of koretzli. That does sort of call me.
I totally hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Any hidden talents? We know some of your revealed ones, but any hidden talents?
I'm a bad crocheter.
Okay.
Everything
I'll know where not to go.
No, I crochet things badly.
Okay.
But I get a certain amount of pleasure from that, yeah.
We're going back to the toil. You're toiling to then get to a better place. Please share with us something that you're grateful for in your life right now.
It's easy. That Baruch Hashem, that we all in my larger family and immediate family made it through Corona alive is something for which I'm extremely grateful.
Amen. That Corona's in our past, according to that sentence. Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. Being the child of Holocaust survivors, I am naturally pessimistic about disasters. But but the fact that Have'atanu ad halom, Hashem has brought us this far. And I know many people have suffered very, very badly in all sorts of ways from Corona, not just directly from the disease. I'm extremely grateful that we're, again, everyone in my immediate family and my extended family is alive and well after Corona.
Amen. Simi, thank you so much for this conversation.
It was fun. I enjoyed it very much.
Great to be here. And everyone should please check out your book, and your forthcoming book, Bezrat Hashem in Hebrew, will enable you to reach additional audiences. And it will, by the way. It's going to be a great thing.
Bezrat Hashem.
And so thank you so much.
A pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I am Dr. Yosefa Fogel-Rubel, and this is One-on-One Women Talk Torah, a series brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. Thank you to the entire Matan team for their input. Please do One-on-One and Women's Torah Learning a small favor by sharing this podcast with family and friends so that we can reach new listeners. You can stream and download these episodes on Spotify, iTunes, and Matan's website, and write us any feedback at podcast@matan.org.il. That's podcast@matan.org.il. Thanks for listening, everyone.